What's your wildest story that sounds too far-fetched to be true? Story 1. In 1987, my dad and his buddies were at a bar in the small town of Fremont, Quebec, town way up north in Canada. For whatever reason, they each signed their names on the $10 bills they had, joking that it'd be funny if one day they got the bill back as change somewhere else. Fast forward to 1992, my mom and dad moved to Vancouver during some rough economic times where he got laid off from his job. He ended up doing trade school and got a job as a mechanic for a little while before getting his old job back and moving to his hometown. Vancouver is on the exact opposite side of Canada, about 5,500 kilometers away from Fremont. They end up going to dinner one night and he gets $10 back as change. He turns the bill around and there's his signature. Story 2. I was surfing in Santa Barbara County when I was a kid, maybe 14 or 15. When I would come in from a surf, I had the habit of undoing my leash from my leg while I was walking in the shallow water. Unbeknownst to me, the other side of the leash that connects to the board had come off. I lost my leash. I searched around the tidal zone but had no luck. I was bummed, but I just moved on. 3 weeks later, I was surfing in Ventura County, and as I was walking in from the surf, a piece of kelp wrapped around my leg. I reached down to pull it off. It wasn't kelp. It was my leash I'd lost a dozen miles north a few weeks back. It had algae and stuff growing on it, but no mistaking it was absolutely my leash. Story 3. First time I ever smoked pot, a police helicopter hovered above me and my friend and hit us with the spotlight. They were looking for someone else apparently because they immediately moved on. Nonetheless. Story 4. Mine is when I was in high school, I lived out in the countryside of Central Texas. I was just kind of bumbling around on the property and my mom's little chihuahua was tagging along. I heard a bird, saw a fast-moving shadow, and threw my arm out, slapping a hawk out of the sky as it tried to get my mom's chihuahua. Cut my arm pretty good, but saved that little rat from a dog. The chihuahua went on to pass away at a smooth 19 years old. I worked nights in college. I'd always take my 2 dogs out to pee when I got home, and one late night an owl tried to snatch my chihuahua, but thankfully missed. My golden retriever ran back inside like the owl was going to somehow take his 60-pound ass, but my Chi stood his ground like he could take it on. I got him inside and was much more careful after that. He, too, passed at 19. I miss him. Story 5. I'm an American from the Midwest. I decided to go to Iceland when it was all the rage a few years back. Found myself several miles off-road on a glacier. Decided it was as good a spot as any for lunch. Sit down on a rock and start eating a sandwich. 2 hikers came up the trail. We say hi. They sound American too. Asked where they're from. They tell me. Oh, that's cool. My sister lives there. She works at a business. The female hiker gives me a funny look. Is your sister so-and-so? Yeah, you know her? She's my roommate. Story 6. I went jogging one night and came across a lady laid out face first. No heartbeat. Started doing CPR. Never saw another person be able to call 911 while doing CPR. Kept it at 20 minutes till FD got there. She made a full recovery. They said CPR that long has a 95% fail rate. The point of CPR, chest compressions, kiss of life, etc., isn't to revive someone. It's just to keep oxygen flowing around their body. Basically, somebody has been switched off, but you're putting them on standby, so the doctors can switch them back on, was the way it was explained to me. Story 7 was in Vegas for a work thing. I was not happy about being there because it was a tough time in my life. Money was really tight, and Vegas is the last place you want to be when money is tight. I was telling my buddy about it, and he said, I'm gonna pay you $150. Go play the poker tournament at the Venetian at night. You can drink for free and hopefully you last long. If you win anything, pay me back. If not, no worries. So I did. Won the tournament. $3,200. The second night, I went off to play some craps alone one night because I did not like the work people and did not want to hang out with them. Started with $200. 45 minutes later, I 7'd out and had $37,000. Cashed out and told no one. On the drive back, I lived in Phoenix, I called my buddy and told him, only, about it. I sent him $2,500. Story 8. 10 months old, 42C, 108F, fever, convulsions, 3 heart stops. The last one doctors gave up, but I came back on my own. Recovered, no sequels. 32 years old. COVID-19, 11 days in a coma, plugged to breathing machines, woke up quadriplegic, lost 25 kilograms of muscle, both kidneys stopped, 75% of lungs compromised, lost the gallbladder, high blood pressure, 32-25. Now I am 34. Got my 2 kidneys working again after a few months of hemodialysis. I'm walking again, but didn't recover all the old muscles back. My lungs work at 100% again. I did have to remove the gallbladder, but I can eat whatever, and I'm still taking pills to control my blood pressure. But every month, I recover more muscle, and the doctor prescribes one less pill. Started with 14, now I'm down to 5 and going strong to 3. Doctor already set the date. Story 9. I worked in TV news as a videographer, and I was at a wildlife refuge in South Florida. At one point, I walked up to a fence and was shooting video of some ostriches. They walked over to me and stood very close as they seemed very curious about me. I was getting some great close-up shots as one ostrich was lightly pecking at my camera. Then, he reached over, snatched my mic's foam windscreen, pulled his head back, and held it in his beak like a cigar. A second later, he gulped it down and stood there, looking at me. Fat, dumb, and happy. I went back to the station and had to explain what happened so I could get a new foam windscreen. When they called bullshit, I put the tape in the player and showed them the proof. A minute later, I had my new windscreen. Story 10. The second, third, and fourth date I went on with my wife had super huge coincidences on them that if I'd planned them would either make me an enormous stalker or a master at planning. Date 2. I take her to a sushi bar where I happen to know the owners. What I didn't know was that his daughter was going to show up that night towards the end of dinner with a box of puppies. Since we were the only ones left in the restaurant, they asked if we wanted to play with them. My wife melted on the spot and instantly said, "Best date ever." Spent half an hour playing with puppies. Date 3. Took her to an aquarium that neither of us had been to before. What I'd found out the first date was that she was a huge fan of Beauty and the Beast, and out of nowhere, about halfway through the aquarium, was a Disney exhibit with half the cast of The Little Mermaid, and for no reason, Belle, who said, "My friend Ariel brought me along." My wife was even wearing her brand new Belle-themed backpack. The picture I have of the two of them together is one I'll cherish forever. Date 4 happened to fall on Valentine's. I hadn't planned on getting her anything that nice because honestly it was still a pretty new relationship. But the day before, she told me that a necklace she'd been waiting for had just arrived, and it was the Music Box key necklace from the movie Anastasia. Here's where it gets weird. I already had the Music Box that the key went into. I'd bought it for a previous relationship that didn't work out, and I'd never gotten a chance to give it to that person. Took me all of 15 minutes to find it in my storage, and it was still new in box. Surprised my wife with it at dinner, and she was in literal tears. She was so happy. She said years later that this was the moment she knew she'd marry me if I ever asked. Granted, I've never been able to top those dates, but I always try, lol. Story 11. I went river tubing down a 4-kilometer stretch of glacial river in rural British Columbia. Somewhere over that 4K, I lost my cell phone. I don't love having a cell phone, so I was putting off replacing it. After 9 days of no cell phone, my husband gently indicated it was time for me to go get a new one. I jokingly told him, "I don't need to. I have a really good feeling it's going to come back to me." 20 minutes later, the Find My iPhone notification appeared on his cell phone, and we got a call saying that a lady's son found my phone after he had fallen out of his tube and stepped directly on my phone. After realizing it didn't feel like a river rock, he reached down and picked up my phone. It was in a life-proof case. They took it home and charged it, and now I'm writing this story on said phone. Story 12. I broke my skull and didn't realize until I was like, hang on, I've got a dent in my head. Went to the doctors and they were like, "Yep, you have fractured your skull," and showed me the CT scan of a massive crater in my head. Still to this day wondering how the fuck I did it. Story 13. I was having a really hard time passing a very large kidney stone, between 5 and 6 millimeters. 6 is too big to pass. After 3 weeks of episodic excruciating pain and bleeding, my doctor scheduled surgery to remove it. I woke up the morning of surgery without a lot of pain. Pain came and went. I put on my slippers and was wearing long flannel PJs. I get up from the TV and feel like there's a pebble in my slipper. The stone dribbled out that morning. Had I not been wearing slippers, that stone would have been lost on the floor somewhere, and I would not have known I had passed it. The last hour discovery saved me from surgery. Story 14. I used to be a nanny. We would go to a local river on hot days. Well, once the 4-year-old lost her pink Crocs sandal, and my God, was she devastated. Why? Aside from the Crocs being the pinnacle of 4-year-old summer fashion, she had put a very cool bluey charm on it. We searched for the shoe for the better half of an hour with no luck, and so we left. We went to get ice cream to soothe the harsh sting of grief and forgot about it. Until, about 2 weeks later, we were at a different park, Upstream, upstream from the Lost Croc River, and the oldest pointed out some trash caught in some branches at the edge of the river. Being kids, they went to poke at it, and what do they find? The goddamn pink croc, bluey charm and all. How the hell it got 3 miles upstream, I have no clue. We figured an animal or something, but that was one of the weirdest things to this day. Story 15. A serious rivalry developed between my bearded dragon and the cat. The dragon trolls the cat, and the cat butts in anytime the dragon is getting affection. One day, I had the dragon on my lap, sitting on the sofa, so the cat started yowling and pacing in front of me. The dragon turns to the edge and takes a running leap, landing on the cat. The cat bolts a couple of laps round the living room floor with the dragon somehow holding on. I avoid telling that story because I don't think anyone would ever believe me. Story 16. I took my Volkswagen to the dealer to get some work done. The service rep at the counter was so hungover, possibly still intoxicated, that he couldn't handle completing the paperwork. He told the tech that I was a VIP, specifically Britney Spears' brother, and that he owed me a favor, so the work was on the house, and they just never did any paperwork. Didn't charge me a dime, did the work, handed me the keys, and away I drove. Story 17. My uncle and I were driving in New York City, and we almost hit a dude. My uncle slams in his brakes, and the dude was expecting to get hit, and I mean by the smallest of margins. It was Dan Aykroyd. He called us motherfuckers. It was an honor to get cursed out by a Ghostbuster. Story 18. 2 weeks in Hawaii on vacation. Last day of the trip, decide to visit the waterfall where Tattoo from Fantasy Island yells, "De plane! De plane!" Hear someone call my name. It was a friend of mine who had dated my best friend Rich in high school. Rich committed suicide some years after high school. We get to chatting, and all of a sudden, she gets quiet and serious and says, "Do you realize it's Rich's birthday today?" Story 19. An old girlfriend and I went on a hot air balloon ride at a balloon festival about 20 years ago. The way this works is you go up in the balloon, the wind carries you away, someone drives a chase car, usually a van of some sort, to fetch you when the balloon comes down. We came down in this beautiful manicured field that happened to be part of a national lab where Manhattan Project work and early research in radioisotopes was conducted. The field was contaminated, and we had to go through the facility's decon procedures, which involve stripping naked and bathing with special cleansers and going through a whole body detector. Story 20. I bought something on Craigslist that contained a huge boa constrictor. I unpacked my purchase when I got home, and I didn't see it crawl out. But all of a sudden, that motherfucker gave me a jump. I called the guy, and he was like, "Oh shit, she's been missing for months. Can you bring her back?" No, dude. Get your ass over here and get this thing out of here. Story 21. I got grabbed by plainclothes cops one night while biking home. Random drug search. I had my backpack full of porn mags a friend had been borrowing, so that was pretty embarrassing for 17-year-old me. In the middle of the search, cops in uniform rush in and arrest the plainclothes one, who were apparently fake cops hustling people for drugs and cash, so I had to show my pack to them as well, and I had to testify against the fake cops in court, telling the entire room about my porn pack. Story 22. Not me, but my wife's aunt. She was out walking her dog with a friend at Lakeside Park a few weeks ago. This is the very same Lakeside Park that is featured in the Rush song of the same name. It was a hot Saturday, and the dogs were starting to get thirsty, but had already consumed the water that they had brought with them. That was when she saw a group having a picnic, complete with barbecue, beer, wine, and water. She approached the group, asking if she could give her dog a drink. The woman who she was speaking with got the dog some water, while the wife's aunt talked to some of the group. It turns out that it was Jethro Tull, taking a break from their touring schedule. They had just played a show the night before and wanted to unwind. They had no idea they were in that Lakeside Park and that they were sitting inside the Neil Peart Memorial Pavilion. Wife's aunt, not being a big Jethro Tull fan, had no idea who they were, but had the presence of mind to get a paper plate autographed. One of the world's greatest prog rock bands, picnicking in the eponymous park from another of the world's greatest prog rock band's biggest hits, inside the pavilion erected to the song's writer, and all she wanted was a little water for the dog. She said they were the nicest people, and their personal chef sent her home with grilled steak and salmon for the pups. Story 23. I saved my grandmother from across the country. Okay, story time. My grandmother and I are close, almost like mother and son. My grandmother and grandfather raised me because my mother and father abandoned me. So, when I got older, I moved away to be with my girlfriend. I would call her weekly. Still do. Anyways, one week I called her for some info on my parents. She doesn't answer. I think it's odd, but hey, she went out or something. So I called for that whole week. Still no answer. So I called my uncle. He gave me the runaround, so I called my aunt. She tries to blow me off, telling me I'm just going crazy. I scream at her to go check on my grandmother. I head off to work. As I get to work, my aunt calls back and says something is wrong. All her mail is still outside and her car is in the driveway. I tell her to go and call the cops. She doesn't have a key, so I demanded to know where the hidden key was from my uncle. I'm still across the country. He tells her, and I get the call that my grandmother, an insulin-dependent diabetic, has been on her floor for about a week now. I got the first plane ticket home to go see her. It didn't hit me till she told me. I saved her from half the country away, because my brain told me not to take no for an answer that day. Story 24. I dropped $2,000 at a strip club once. I was off my meds, manic as fuck, I'm bipolar, and drunk to boot. Where did I get $2,000? Good question. This was back in the early 2000s, and to this day, I have no memory of getting $2,000 all at once. I checked my bank accounts, and I hadn't withdrawn anything. Somehow, I ended up with around $3,500 in cash. I still had about $1,500 left over, and I can't remember where or how I got it. I was apparently so drunk that it disrupted my long-term memory. I never did that again. Story 25. Story I like to share. Younger brother thought it would be a good idea to take the bright blue parakeet we shared as a pet out of its cage in his hands to show it the trees outside. Said bird flies off, never to be seen again. Fast forward 12 years, engaged, moved 60 miles down the road and sharing interesting tales with newfound friends. One guy said, always remember, about 12 years ago as a child, I was cycling down the road when suddenly this cute blue parakeet came out of the sky and landed on my finger. He even let me take it inside and he became our pet for a few years. Some time matching and further descriptions point to it being the same bird. Story 26. When I was 7, my parents put me in ski lessons. While driving up the mountain, my mom suddenly pulled over, got out of the car, walked the wrong direction up the highway, and stopped in front of what was clearly a young mountain lion. She picked it up and put it in the front seat and dropped me off at my ski lesson. The cat was hissing and pissed, but just sat in the front seat. She called the zoo on her way down the mountain, and they politely informed her that she needed to call Fish and Game. She did this and ultimately drove it back to the city to drop it off with them, making a pit stop at her law office to show everyone. Turned out someone had found it as a baby and tried to keep it as a pet. Once it got big and mean, they set it loose, but it had no skills and had gone blind from malnourishment. This is why it let my mother pick it up and drive it all over creation. It was never able to be set free, as its vision was permanently damaged, but lived a happy life at a sanctuary. My mother has zero experience with wildlife. She thought it was a bobcat until the zoo corrected her, and the story sounds unbelievable unless you've met her.